everyone, welcome back. This is Allison, and today we're going to do part 2 of shaped shaker cards. Yesterday I made a card using a shape for the shaker window, and today I'm going to do the same thing, but today I'm going to be using the shadow layer of a word die. The word die is the script Let's Party die from Simon Says Stamp, and I'm going to use the actual word part of it to make sure that I'm happy with how things are lined up, because this is an A2 sized panel and I am going to use this full panel for the front of my card. So I want to make sure that everything, is lined up properly. Now I'm going to put that panel through this new embossing folder. This is the Circle Hoops embossing folder. This is brand new from the Out of This World release from Simon Says Stamp. And whenever I put a panel of paper into a 3D embossing folder, I always spray it with water first. It just helps it from cracking. I don't often have that problem, but I'm just in the habit of spraying my paper. The other thing is, whenever I have a cutout in a panel, I always cut it out first before embossing. If I were to emboss the panel first and then cut that shape out, it would just flatten out the embossing. So now that our panel is ready, we can get the shaker window ready. And I'm going to use this acetate to do that. So I already had a small piece, but I'm just going to cut it down to the right size. And just like in yesterday's shaker, I am going to use Scor-Tape to attach the acetate. And there you saw me just making sure I was putting the acetate on the right side. This is a really cool embossing folder, but I will say that the front and the back look very similar because these circles have so much detail. So I was using the word to help me figure out which was the front and which was the back. So here I am adhering the acetate to the back of the panel, and we're ready to turn it into a shaker. So for today's shaker, I'm using a different foam tape than yesterday. I'm using Altenew foam tape. This is a little bit thinner than the Simon Says Stamp foam tape that I used on yesterday's card. And I'm using a really flat shaker bit today. You'll see it in a moment what I'm going to use, but they're very flat confetti. So I really don't need to build up my shaker very high. And so one layer of this foam tape will be just perfect. So like I was saying, I'm going to use confetti, and it's the Trinity Stamps Oh My Stars confetti. And again, it's just perfectly flat. And just like yesterday, I'm going to try to gently pour this confetti in, but you'll see in a second that just like yesterday, I overpour, and there I go. So I'm just going to put some back. If you didn't see yesterday's video, I will have a link to it below. And again, it was just another shaker card using a different shape for the window. So now I can pull off all the release tape and enclose my shaker. And to enclose this, I'm going to use the actual card base. I had mentioned before that this panel is A2 sized. It is 4 1/4 by 5.5 inches. So I'm just going to adhere the whole thing to a card base. And here I am with my card base. And I'm just going to attach it right onto the shaker. And that seals it up. And that was easy peasy. So now that I am finished with the shaker part, I decided that the white embossing was just a little too plain for me. So I'm coming in with some blue ink, and I'm going to just ink up the edges. And I was lucky that I decided to do this as a full panel, because if I had attached this panel to a card base and it was smaller than the card base, then I would not have easily been able to come in and ink up the edges, but because it's a full panel and it's covering the entire card base, it was easy for me to come in and ink it up. And I love how the blue ink just brings out the texture of that embossing folder. And of course, turquoise, my favorite color, so you can't go wrong with that. So there we go with the finished inking. And now I'm going to use another new die set from Simon. This is called the Balloon Assortment. And again, this is another recently released product. You saw the balloon die. It cuts out a bunch of balloons at once. And the balloons that you see on my panel, they have not been adhered yet, but I have popped them up onto 2 layers of white balloons. So there are 3 layers total. And now I am just going to adhere them to the card base with liquid glue. And the colors that you see are not colored cardstock. I actually cut 3 layers of balloons from white cardstock, and then the top layer I just colored with distress inks, just various colors. And I'm just kind of playing around with the placement. And I love all these little balloon shapes. And there were some, I don't know if you saw in the die, there are some heart balloons as well. I just didn't use those on this card. So at this point, I am coming back in just to ink up one of these yellow balloons a little bit more. I'm trying to get different shades of yellow on these balloons. So just adjusting as I'm going. And that one is ready to go, so I can glue it right on there. And then once I am done with the balloons, I am going to glue my sentiment. So the sentiment I had cut from black glossy cardstock, and I had popped it up on 2 layers of white cardstock. So this sentiment is 3 layers of cardstock. And I've probably mentioned this a bazillion times in my videos. I love creating word dies from black glossy cardstock. It just pops against any background, and it makes such a big difference in the sentiments. And I actually find it easier to cut these delicate dies from glossy cardstock than from regular cardstock. So now that we have everything done, I am going to come in with some more of those little confetti pieces. Again, this is Trinity Stamps, Oh My Stars. And I'm just going to glue some onto the top of the card base, and that will just tie everything in. It ties the front of the card base to what's inside the shaker. And I love these little stars. They're kind of holographic looking, so when you turn them in the light, they turn different colors. Especially when they're, they just pick up the colors that are next to them. And the only thing left after this is I decided to give the balloons a little bit more detail. So I will be coming in with a white gel pen and putting highlights on the balloons. And as I'm doing it, you'll see me once in a while drawing on my hand. And that's just a trick to keep the white gel pen flowing. I'm not really sure why it works. I guess it's the warmth of your hand that does it, but usually whenever I use a white gel pen, my hand is usually covered in white gel pen at the end. So once I am done with this, the card is going to be finished, and I'm going to shake it up and let you hear it, because it's always fun to hear the shaker in action. So here we go in a second, you'll hear it. And that is it for my card today. Again, I hope this gives you inspiration to find fun shapes in your stash to make shaker cards. I think shaker cards are so fun to give to people because most people who receive them have never received something that special before. And it's just fun to make. I thank you for joining me today. And again, I will have a link to the first video below, as well as a link to all of the supplies. Have a great day. Bye.